My grandmother quietly changed her will and removed my aunt's name from it. $420,000 that had been promised for 22 years. At the family reading, my aunt demanded answers. Grandmother didn't flinch. She stood up and said, "I found out what you did with your daughter's college fund." Her lawyer dropped everything. "Some people in my family still think I went too far. After everything you are about to hear, I want to know what you think." The reading happened in my grandmother's living room on a Tuesday afternoon in March. 13 of us packed into that space with the heavy curtains and the furniture that smelled like lavender sachets. My Aunt Diane sat in the center of the sofa, hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait. She'd worn her good pearls. She always wore them when she thought something important was about to happen that involved her. My Uncle Richard stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. My mother sat on the other side of the room, closest to the door. She always positioned herself near exits. Patricia Reyes, my grandmother's attorney for 30 years, sat at the dining table with the will in front of her. She looked tired. I found out later she'd tried 3 times to talk my grandmother out of what was about to happen. My grandmother had told her no each time. When Patricia started reading, the room had that particular silence that happens when everyone is pretending they're not calculating their share. My grandmother sat in her chair by the window, 86 years old, and her spine was still straight as a ruler. She caught my eye once while Patricia was reading through the preliminary sections. She gave me the smallest nod. We both knew what was coming. "Let me tell you how we got here. I grew up watching my Aunt Diane operate. She had this way of making you feel like you'd won something when really she'd just taken what she wanted and left you holding the bag. She did it to everyone. My mother, my uncle, her own husband. But mostly she did it to her daughter, my cousin Jessica. Jessica is 3 years younger than me. When she was 16, she got a full academic scholarship to Northwestern, art history. The girl could look at a painting and tell you not just who painted it, but what the painter had for breakfast that morning. My aunt told everyone at the celebration dinner that she was so proud. She gave a whole speech about sacrifice and investment and family legacy. She had tears in her eyes. 2 months before Jessica was supposed to start, my aunt told her the scholarship didn't cover housing. This was a lie. The scholarship covered everything. But my aunt had this way of presenting false information like it was a bureaucratic mix-up that wasn't her fault. She told Jessica that Grandma had agreed to cover the housing costs from Jessica's trust fund. The trust fund my grandfather had set up before he died, $25,000 specifically for Jessica's education. My aunt was the trustee. Jessica never went to Northwestern. My aunt told her the trust fund had been mismanaged and there wasn't enough. She told Jessica that sometimes we have to adjust our dreams to fit reality. Jessica enrolled at the state school instead. She dropped out after a year. Last I heard, she was managing a craft store in Schaumburg and hadn't painted anything in 6 years. I found out the real story 3 years ago. My grandmother told me at Christmas. We were in her kitchen and she was washing dishes even though I'd told her I'd do it. She said, "Your aunt took that money for a kitchen renovation. $23,000 for cabinets and countertops." I saw the invoice. She left Jessica with $2,000 and told her it wouldn't be enough. I asked why she didn't say anything at the time. She said, "I didn't have proof. Diane showed me paperwork that made it look like educational expenses. It took me years to get the real records." That was my aunt. She had paperwork for everything. She could make theft look like fiscal responsibility. But that wasn't the first time I'd seen her operate. When I was 23, I'd been working in insurance sales for 8 months. I was good at it. Not great yet, but good. Consistent. I'd closed my first major policy the week before Thanksgiving, $12,000 in commission. I was proud of myself. At Thanksgiving dinner, I mentioned it, just mentioned it. My aunt put her fork down and looked at me with this expression like I'd just told her I was taking up exotic dancing. She said, "Oh, sweetie, insurance. Well, someone has to do it, I suppose." My mother jumped in, trying to smooth it over. She said, "It's a good starter job, very stable." My aunt patted my hand. She said, "You might want to think about something more professional. Have you considered teaching? You were always good with children." I had never been good with children. I had babysat exactly twice in my life, and both times the kids had cried. I smiled. I said thank you for the suggestion. That night I went home and I updated my LinkedIn profile and I started reaching out to every commercial broker I could find. Within 3 months, I'd moved to a firm that specialized in corporate accounts. Within a year, I was clearing 6 figures. I never corrected my aunt's assumption that I was still selling life insurance policies to nervous homeowners. When I was 27, I bought my first property, a 2-flat in Logan Square. My aunt heard about it somehow. She called me. She said, "I heard you're getting into real estate. That's ambitious. Do you have someone advising you? Because your Uncle Richard knows someone who could help." These things can get complicated when you don't know what you're doing. I told her I appreciated the offer. I didn't tell her I'd closed the deal with cash and already had tenants lined up who would cover the mortgage 3 times over. I didn't tell her I'd spent 6 months analyzing the market and working with a real estate attorney who specialized in investment properties. I let her think I was in over my head. She sent me a book, Real Estate Investing for Beginners. I still have it somewhere. I never opened it. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. You know how it calculates in your chest, how it becomes fuel. The pattern was clear. My aunt needed me to be less than her. She needed everyone to be less than her. It wasn't about money, exactly. She had money. My Uncle Richard had done well in medical device sales. They lived in a nice house in Evanston. They took vacations. But it was never enough for her to just have things. She needed you to know she had them and you didn't. She needed to be the one who gave advice, who helped, who rescued. She needed you smaller so she could be bigger. My mother went along with it because that's what my mother did. She was the younger sister. She'd spent 58 years making herself smaller so Diane could be bigger. At family gatherings, my mother served. Diane held court. When Diane talked, my mother listened like she was receiving instructions from a general. I watched her do it my entire childhood. I promised myself I would never do that. I would never fold myself down to make someone else comfortable. But I also learned something from watching my mother. I learned that you don't always have to fight in the moment. Sometimes you fight later. Sometimes you fight when you have better positioning. My mother never learned that second part. She just folded and stayed folded. I was building something different. By the time I was 32, I had 4 properties and a commercial insurance portfolio that generated residual income most people would consider a full salary. I worked from home 3 days a week. I had a retirement account that made my accountant actually smile, which I'd learned was rare. And my family thought I was doing fine. Cute, even. Little Emily with her insurance job and her 1 rental property that she'd probably overpaid for. My aunt asked me once if I'd thought about going back to school. She said the market was getting competitive and maybe a master's degree would help me stay relevant. I told her I'd think about it. I had just signed a contract with a manufacturing company that would pay me $78,000 over 2 years. I didn't mention that. The reason I kept quiet wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was strategy. The moment my family knew what I had, they would want to be involved in it. They would have opinions about it. My aunt would give advice. She would position herself as the experienced one, the mentor. She would find ways to make my success about her wisdom. I didn't want that. I wanted to build something that was completely mine, that existed in a space where her voice couldn't reach. Also, I liked knowing. I liked sitting at those dinners and listening to her talk about risk management and market timing and fiscal responsibility, and I liked knowing that I'd already lapped her. That I was doing things she couldn't even track. It made her condescension feel like background noise. Irritating, but irrelevant. But then Jessica happened. And when I found out what my aunt had done to her own daughter, all that strategic silence started to feel like cowardice. Because I'd been building my wall, protecting my space, and the whole time my aunt had been gutting her daughter's future, and I hadn't said a word. I told my grandmother I wanted to help Jessica. She told me Jessica wouldn't take money from family. Too much pride, too much damage. She said, the only thing that girl would accept is the truth, and maybe not even that. That's when I started paying attention differently. Not just to what my aunt said to me, but to how she talked about money in general, how she talked about Jessica, how she positioned herself in every family story. I started listening the way you listen when you're gathering evidence. I started building my case. I knew my grandmother was revising her will. She'd mentioned it casually at a birthday lunch, just the 2 of us. She said she was making sure things were fair. She said fair didn't always mean equal. She didn't elaborate. I didn't push. But I knew her well enough to know that when she used the word fair in that particular tone, someone was about to lose something they thought they had. 3 months before the reading, I met with my own attorney. Not about my grandmother's will, about mine. I was updating beneficiaries, making sure my properties were structured correctly. Patricia Reyes was there, actually, consulting on a trust question. We ended up talking for 2 hours. She asked me about my family. I told her some of it, not all of it, but enough. She said, "Your grandmother talks about you." I said, "Yeah," she said, "she's proud of you. She says you remind her of herself." That's the only time Patricia ever came close to discussing my grandmother's estate with me before the reading, but I understood what she was saying. My grandmother saw something in me that she valued, and whatever she was planning, it had been in motion for longer than 3 months. I didn't know exactly what was in the will. My grandmother never told me specifics, but I knew the general shape of her thinking. She believed in rewarding people who built things, who worked, who didn't just coast on inheritance and family name. She told me once that the worst thing you could do for someone was give them enough money to be comfortable, but not enough purpose to matter. She said that's how you created people like my aunt. People who spent their lives managing what they had instead of making anything new. I had started to suspect that my aunt was not going to like what my grandmother had planned. 2 months before the reading, my family had Easter dinner at my aunt's house. The kitchen she'd renovated with Jessica's college money. It was beautiful, I'll give her that, marble countertops, custom cabinets, one of those farmhouse sinks that cost more than most people's cars. She gave tour. She talked about the contractor, the timeline, the design process. She said, "You have to invest in your home, it's the foundation of everything." Jessica wasn't there. She'd stopped coming to family events 2 years earlier. My aunt said it was because Jessica was busy with work. Everyone knew that was a lie. Jessica had cut contact. My aunt pretended not to notice. I stood in that kitchen and I looked at those countertops and I thought about Jessica at that state school, dropping out, giving up. I thought about Northwestern, about the life she could have had. I didn't say anything. I smiled. I complimented the tile backsplash. My mother pulled me aside later. She said, "You've been quiet." I said, "Just tired." She said, "Your aunt means well. She's just trying to help when she gives you advice." I said, "I know." My mother looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You're doing okay, aren't you, with work?" I said, "I'm doing fine." She nodded. She didn't push. My mother never pushed. That was her whole problem. She'd spent her life not pushing and look where it got her. 58 years old and still asking permission to have opinions. I loved my mother, but I didn't want to be her. The close call happened 3 weeks before the will reading. My Uncle Richard asked me about retirement planning. We were at a family cookout. He said he had a guy, a financial advisor, really sharp, good with growth strategies. He said, "You're at that age where you need to start thinking long-term. I could introduce you." I said, "That's really kind. I actually have someone I work with, but thank you." He said, "Yeah, who are you with?" And right there in the middle of my aunt's backyard, with the grill going and my cousins playing cornhole, I almost told him. I almost said the name of my wealth management firm, the one that required a $250,000 minimum to even open an account. I almost said it just to watch his face change. Instead, I said, "Just a local guy, does good work." My aunt was standing close enough to hear. She said, "Richard, leave her alone. She's doing fine. Not everyone needs aggressive growth strategies." She smiled at me, warm, condescending, completely confident. I smiled back. I said, "Exactly. I'm pretty boring when it comes to money." My uncle shrugged and went back to the grill. My aunt patted my shoulder as she walked past. She said, "Smart girl." That night I went home and I called my accountant. I said, "I need documentation, everything. Every property, every account, every contract. Clean, official, organized." He said, "What's this for?" I said, "Insurance." He said, "Against what?" I said, "Family." He laughed. He thought I was joking. I wasn't joking. The documents arrived a week later. 63 pages, property deeds, account statements, tax returns, contract summaries, portfolio valuations. Everything I'd built in 10 years, organized in a leather binder that cost more than my first month's rent had been. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but I liked having it. I liked knowing that if the moment came, I'd be ready. I put it in my safe. I didn't look at it again until the morning of the will reading. That morning, I almost didn't bring it. I thought about leaving it at home. This was my grandmother's moment, not mine. Whatever she'd planned for her own reasons. This wasn't about me proving anything. But then I thought about Jessica. About that kitchen. About my aunt's face every time she'd told me to be realistic, to aim lower, to be grateful for small things. I put the binder in my bag. My grandmother called me 2 hours before the reading. She said, "Are you coming?" I said, "Of course." She said, "Good. Wear something you feel strong in." I said, "That's specific advice." She said, "It's going to be a specific afternoon." Then she hung up. I wore black pants and a white silk shirt, the one I'd bought when I signed my first major commercial contract. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who'd built something real and wasn't apologizing for it. I picked up my bag with the binder inside. I still didn't know if I'd use it. But I was ready if the moment came. And that's when I realized I'd been preparing for this moment for 10 years. Every contract I'd signed, every property I'd bought, every time I'd smiled and stayed quiet while my aunt talked down to me, it had all been leading here. To this Tuesday afternoon in March, to my grandmother's living room, to whatever was about to happen. I drove to her house knowing that by the end of the day, everything would be different. I had no idea how different. I walked into that living room and I knew immediately something was different. The air felt charged. My grandmother was already in her chair by the window. She looked at me and her expression didn't change, but I saw something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or solidarity. My aunt was already holding court. She'd positioned herself on the sofa like it was a throne. She was talking to my cousin Mark about his new job, giving him advice about office politics. He was nodding along, but I could see he wasn't really listening. Nobody really listened to my aunt anymore. They just waited for her to finish. My mother was in the kitchen with my uncle's wife, arranging cookies on a plate nobody would eat. Busy work, my mother's specialty. Patricia arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. She had a leather portfolio and the kind of tired expression lawyers get when they know they're about to facilitate something uncomfortable. She sat up at the dining table. My grandmother gestured for everyone to sit. My aunt sat front and center. She'd worn a navy dress, pearls, hair done. She looked like she was about to accept an award. Patricia opened the portfolio. The room got quiet in that specific way that happens when money is about to be discussed. My aunt folded her hands in her lap, composed, confident. Patricia started reading. The preliminary sections, legal language. Nobody was really listening to that part. We were all waiting for the numbers. Then Patricia got to the distributions. She read my Uncle Richard's portion first. $50,000, he nodded, expected. My cousin Mark, $30,000, he looked pleased. My mother, $75,000 and my grandmother's jewelry collection. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Then Patricia paused, just for a second. I saw her glance at my grandmother. My grandmother gave the smallest nod. Patricia cleared her throat. She started reading my aunt's section. To my daughter Diane, I leave my silver tea service and my gratitude for the years she spent as trustee for her daughter Jessica's educational fund. That was it. That was the whole thing. The room went completely still. My aunt's face did something I'd never seen before. Her expression froze, stuck between a smile and confusion, like her brain was still processing, still waiting for the rest of the sentence. "I'm sorry," my aunt finally spoke. Her voice came out strange. "That's not right. Patricia, there's been a mistake." Patricia didn't look up from the document. "There's no mistake." My aunt stood up. "Mother, the $420,000, we discussed this. For 22 years, you've told me that money was mine, you promised." My grandmother stayed in her chair. She looked smaller than usual in that moment, but her voice was steady. "I did promise, and then I found out what you did." "What I did?" My aunt's voice went up half an octave. "What are you talking about?" My grandmother reached into the folder on the table beside her chair. She pulled out a piece of paper. "I'm talking about Jessica's college fund, the one your father set up, $25,000 for her education." My aunt's hand went to her necklace. She always did that when she was nervous. "Jessica's fund was mismanaged. I told you this. The market took a hit and you took $23,000 and renovated your kitchen." My grandmother's voice cut through like a blade. "I have the invoice, from the contractor, dated September 2003, the same month Jessica was supposed to start at Northwestern." My aunt opened her mouth, closed it. "That's not, Mother, you don't understand. The fund wasn't sufficient for housing and the scholarship covered housing." This was me. I hadn't planned to speak yet, but the lie was so egregious I couldn't stay quiet. Northwestern's presidential scholarship covered tuition, room, board, and books. I looked it up. My aunt turned to me. Her expression shifted, not angry yet, confused, like she couldn't quite place why I was involved. "Emily, this is a private family matter." "Jessica is family," I replied. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." I kept my voice level. "You told Jessica the scholarship didn't cover housing. You told her the trust fund had been mismanaged. You told her there wasn't enough money, and then you spent her college fund on marble countertops." My Uncle Richard was staring at his wife. "Diane, tell me that's not true." My aunt turned to him. "Richard, don't be ridiculous. Mother is confused. She's 86 years old and Patricia has obviously—" "I'm not confused." My grandmother's voice was sharp. I have documentation. Bank statements, withdrawal records. The contractor's invoice with your signature. Patricia has reviewed everything. Patricia spoke without looking up. The documentation is conclusive. My aunt's confidence was starting to crack. I could see it in the way she was gripping her pearls. This is absurd. You're going to believe some paperwork over your own daughter? I have been managing family finances for decades. I have been responsible. I have been careful. And this is how you repay me? You stole from your daughter. My grandmother stood up. She was small, but in that moment she seemed 10 feet tall. You took her future and you spent it on appliances. My aunt's face flushed red. I did not steal. That fund was managed through me as trustee. I made decisions about allocation. Sometimes we have to make hard choices about, where's Jessica now? I asked. My aunt turned to me. What? Where is Jessica? What's she doing? She's working. She's managing a store in Schaumburg. She's doing fine. She's managing a craft store for $32,000 a year. She dropped out of college. She stopped painting. She hasn't spoken to you in 2 years. I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Does that sound fine to you? My aunt's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the room for support. My uncle was staring at the floor. My mother was still in the doorway to the kitchen, frozen. My cousin Mark was looking at his phone like he wished he could disappear into it. Emily, I don't know what your grandmother has told you, but grandmother told me the truth, which is more than you've ever done. My aunt's expression changed. Something harder came into her eyes. You have no idea what you're talking about. You with your little insurance job and your rental property. You think you understand family finances? You think you understand responsibility? I understand theft. She actually laughed, sharp and bitter. Theft? You want to talk about theft? Let me tell you what theft is. Theft is ungrateful children who forget everything their parents sacrificed. Theft is a mother who changes her will after 22 years because of paperwork she doesn't even understand. Theft is, you took $23,000 that wasn't yours. My grandmother cut her off. You lied to your daughter, you destroyed her future, and you did it for a kitchen. My aunt whirled back to her mother. I made an investment in my home. I made a choice about resource allocation. Jessica could have gone to the state school. She could have worked harder for more scholarships. She could have gone to Northwestern. I stood up. I hadn't planned this moment, but I was done sitting. She could have studied art history. She could have had the life she earned, but you took that from her. My aunt stared at me, really looked at me for the first time. What do you care? You barely even talked to Jessica. Because she cut contact with the whole family. Because being around you was too painful. Because every family dinner was a reminder of what she lost. She lost nothing. She made choices. You made choices for her. My aunt's voice went cold. You need to sit down, Emily. This doesn't concern you. Actually, my grandmother said quietly, it does concern her. My aunt turned. What? My grandmother looked at Patricia. Patricia pulled out another document from her portfolio. The remaining $420,000 has been placed in a trust. The beneficiary is Jessica. The trustee is Emily. The room went silent. My aunt stared at my grandmother, then at Patricia, then at me. You're giving Emily control of no? Absolutely not. Mother, Emily doesn't know the first thing about managing money. She's a middle-tier insurance agent who? I'm a commercial insurance broker with a portfolio that generates $340,000 annually in residual income. I said it quietly, matter of fact. I own 4 properties in Chicago worth a combined $2.1 million. I have a retirement account worth $670,000. I have no debt, and I know how to manage a trust. My aunt's face went completely blank. Like I just started speaking a foreign language. My uncle looked up. What? I've been building a business for 10 years. I've been investing. I've been managing my own finances very carefully. I kept my eyes on my aunt. You just never asked. My aunt's hands were shaking. That's not possible. You live in a 1-bedroom apartment. You drive a Honda. I live simply. I save aggressively. I invest intelligently. I pulled the leather binder out of my bag. I set it on the coffee table. This is documentation of every asset I own, every contract, every property, every account. Patricia has reviewed it. She agrees I'm qualified to serve as trustee for Jessica's fund. Patricia nodded. I've reviewed Ms. Emily's financial statements. She's more than qualified. My aunt looked at the binder like it was a snake. You've been lying all this time. You've been pretending to be. I haven't been pretending anything. You assumed I let you. She turned to my mother. Did you know about this? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. No. And you're okay with this, with your daughter lying to the family for a decade? My mother looked at me. really looked at me. I saw something shift in her expression. Something like pride, maybe, or recognition. She didn't lie, we just didn't ask the right questions. My aunt whirled back to my grandmother. You can't do this. That money was promised to me. 22 years. You can't just give it to Jessica because of some paperwork error from 2 decades ago. It wasn't an error. My grandmother's voice was steel. It was a choice, your choice, and now I'm making mine. My aunt's composure was completely gone now. Her face was blotchy. Her hands were shaking. I have done everything for this family. I have managed the finances. I have organized the gatherings. I have held everything together while the rest of you've held yourself above everyone. I kept my voice calm. You've spent 20 years making everyone feel small so you could feel big. You've given advice nobody asked for. You've made decisions that weren't yours to make. And when your own daughter needed you to just let her succeed, you couldn't do it. Because her success would have meant you weren't the most important person in the room anymore. She stared at me. You have no right. I have every right. I've watched you operate my entire life. I've watched you dismiss me, condescend to me, pat my hand and tell me to be realistic. And the whole time I was building something you couldn't even imagine. But I stayed quiet because I knew the moment you knew what I had, you'd want to be part of it. You'd want to give advice. You'd want credit. I picked up the binder. This is mine, I built it, and you don't get to touch it. My uncle stood up. He was looking at my aunt like he'd never seen her before. Did you really take Jessica's college money for the kitchen? My aunt turned to him. Richard, don't do this here, did you? It was more complicated than, did you take our daughter's college fund and spend it on countertops? The silence stretched out. My aunt's mouth worked, but nothing came out. Oh my God. Richard sat down hard. You did, you actually did. I made a choice about resource allocation in a difficult, you destroyed her future for a kitchen. His voice cracked. Our daughter, Diane, what did you do? My aunt looked around the room. Everyone was staring at her. Nobody was coming to her defense. Nobody was making excuses. She was alone in the center of a room full of people, and she was completely alone. This is a mistake. Her voice came out high and desperate. Mother, please, we can discuss this. We can work this out, you don't have to do this. I already did it. My grandmother sat back down in her chair. The will is filed, the trust is established. Jessica will receive her inheritance, and you will receive what you earned. A tea service. My aunt's voice was hollow. You're leaving me a tea service. And my gratitude, for the years you spent as trustee? My grandmother's voice was absolutely devoid of warmth, however misguided those years were. My aunt turned to Patricia. This can't be legal. I can contest this. You can contest it. Patricia's voice was neutral, professional. You won't win. Your mother was evaluated by 2 independent physicians. She's of sound mind. The will was prepared in accordance with all legal requirements, and the evidence of your mismanagement of Jessica's trust is documented and conclusive. My aunt looked at the binder on the coffee table, then at me. You planned this, you and Mother. You've been planning this? I didn't plan anything. I kept my voice level. I just stopped pretending to be smaller than I am. I want to speak to my mother, alone. No, my grandmother's voice was final. We're done here. Patricia, is there anything else? Patricia shuffled papers. That concludes the reading. Copies of the will are available for all beneficiaries. If anyone has questions, they can contact my office. My grandmother stood up. Thank you for coming. You can all leave now. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then my uncle stood. He looked at my aunt. We need to talk at home. My aunt didn't move. She was staring at my grandmother like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't have an answer. Deanne, Richard's voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. We're leaving. My aunt stood slowly. She looked at me one more time. Her expression was something I couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or recognition. Or the dawning realization that the person she'd been condescending to for a decade had just eclipsed her entirely. She walked to the door. Richard followed. They left without another word. My cousin Mark left right after them. My mother lingered in the doorway. She looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? She thought about that. I don't know, maybe not. That's why, she nodded slowly. Then she crossed the room and hugged me. Brief, tight, she whispered, I'm proud of you. I hugged her back. Thanks, Mom, she left. Patricia packed up her portfolio. She paused at the door. That was well done. I didn't know if she meant my grandmother's will or my timing or my documentation. I just nodded. Then it was just me and my grandmother. She looked at me from her chair by the window. I should have done something sooner. When Jessica lost Northwestern, I should have intervened. You didn't have proof then. I should have looked harder. I sat down on the sofa. You did what you could. And you, she studied me. You've been preparing for this. I've been preparing to defend myself if I needed to. I didn't know it would be today. But you brought the documentation. I brought the documentation. She smiled, just a little. You're more like me than your mother ever was. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. She leaned back in her chair. Your mother is kind. She wants people to be happy. You and I, we want people to be honest. Those are different things. I thought about that. Yeah, they are. Jessica is going to need support. The money will help, but she'll need more than that. I'll make sure she gets it. I know you will, that's why I chose you. She closed her eyes. I'm tired now, thank you for being here. I stood up. Thank you for trusting me. I always have. I drove home in a daze. The whole afternoon felt surreal. I kept expecting my phone to ring, my aunt screaming, Richard demanding explanations, something, but it didn't ring. I got home and I sat in my car for 10 minutes just breathing. Then I went inside and I called Jessica. She answered on the third ring, cautious. Hello? It's Emily, your cousin. I know who you are. Her voice was guarded. What's going on? Your grandmother changed her will today. There was a reading. Your mother was there. Long pause. Okay. Jessica, your grandmother set up a trust for you. $420,000. I'm the trustee. The money is yours. Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing. Jessica? Why? Her voice cracked. Why would she do that? Because your mother took your college fund and spent it on a kitchen renovation. Grandmother found proof. She wanted to make it right. She knows. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. She knows what my mom did. Everyone knows now. It came out at the reading, all of it. I heard her crying, soft, like she was trying to muffle it. Jessica, the money is for you, for whatever you want. School, a house, a studio. Whatever you need. I can't go back to school. I'm 28 years old. I have a job. I have a life. You can do whatever you want. That's the point. She was quiet for a long time. Then, does my dad know? He was there. He heard everything. What did he say? He looked like his world just collapsed. He didn't know, Jessica. I don't think he knew. More silence. Then, I need time to process this. Can I call you in a few days? Take all the time you need. The money isn't going anywhere. Thank you, she paused. Emily, you didn't have to do this. Your grandmother did this. I'm just making sure it happens the way she wanted. Still, thank you. She hung up. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand and I thought about my aunt's face when I'd laid out my assets. The shock, the disbelief. The moment she realized she'd been wrong about me for a decade, I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt tired and relieved. And like something that had been pressing on my chest for years had finally lifted. 3 days later, Richard called me. He sounded exhausted. Emily, I need to ask you something. Okay. Did you know about what Diane did to Jessica? I found out 3 years ago. Grandmother told me. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't have proof, and Jessica had already cut contact. I didn't think bringing it up would help. He was quiet. I should have noticed. I should have asked more questions. Yeah, you should have. I'm filing for separation. The lawyers are drawing up papers. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry. Don't be, this isn't on you. He paused. She's been lying to me too, about money, about investments. I'm just starting to see how much. Richard, I can recommend a good forensic accountant if you need one. I might take you up on that. Another pause. Your grandmother knew what she was doing, leaving you as trustee. You're the only one in this family who has their shit together. I just planned better. No, you saw the game and you played it smarter. There's a difference. After he hung up, I sat there thinking about what he'd said. The game, that's what it had been in a way. My aunt playing power dynamics, me playing the long game, both of us strategic, just with different goals. She wanted to be the most important person in every room. I wanted to be free of her entirely. I won. Jessica called me 2 weeks later. She'd thought about the money. She wanted to use part of it to finish her degree, art history, maybe teach eventually, maybe just learn for the sake of learning. She'd also found a studio space in Pilsen, cheap rent, good light. She was going to start painting again. I don't know if I'm any good anymore, she told me. It's been 6 years. There's only one way to find out. Yeah, she laughed, soft. Emily, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you stay quiet? About your money, your success. Why didn't you ever tell my mom to shut up? I thought about that. Because the moment she knew what I had, she'd want a piece of it. She'd want credit for it. She'd tell everyone she'd given me advice that helped, or she'd find a way to make it about her. I didn't want her anywhere near what I'd built. But weren't you mad when she talked down to you? At first, then it just became information. Every time she underestimated me, I learned something about how she thought. What she valued, what scared her, I used it. That's cold, maybe, but it worked. She was quiet for a moment. I think Grandma knew what you were doing. I think that's why she trusted you. Your grandmother understood strategy. Yeah, she did. Jessica's voice got softer. Thank you for taking this on, for managing the trust, for giving a shit when nobody else did. You deserved better than what happened to you. We all did, but you're the only one who did something about it. After we hung up, I thought about that. About doing something versus waiting for someone else to fix it. About being strategic versus being nice. About winning versus being liked. My aunt spent 20 years making herself the center of every family story. She needed to be the wise one, the generous one, the one who knew best. She built her entire identity on being superior. And when that identity got challenged, when the proof came out that she'd stolen from her own daughter, when I revealed that I'd surpassed her years ago, she had nothing left. Her marriage was ending. Her daughter wouldn't speak to her. Her inheritance was a tea service. I saw her once after the will reading, 3 months later, at the grocery store. She was in the produce section. She saw me. I watched her face do this complicated thing where she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what. We stood there for 5 seconds, then she turned and walked away. I bought my groceries. I went home. I didn't think about her again for weeks. That's the thing about winning, I guess. It's not as satisfying as you think it'll be. You spend years imagining the moment of victory, the vindication, the look on their face when they realize they were wrong. And then it happens and it just feels like closing a door you should have closed years ago. My life didn't change after the will reading. I still ran my business. I still managed my properties. I still had coffee with my mother every other Sunday. The only difference was that my aunt wasn't there anymore, making comments, giving advice, making everything about her. And it turned out I didn't miss that at all. Jessica finished her degree last year. She's teaching now, part-time at a community college. Art history survey courses. She sent me a picture of her first class. 20 students, all of them looking at slides of Italian Renaissance paintings while she stood at the front of the room talking about perspective and patronage and power. She looked happy. That's the part that matters, I think. Not that my aunt lost her inheritance, not that I got to reveal my success, but that Jessica got her future back, that she got to finish what she started, that she's standing in front of a classroom talking about art instead of managing a craft store and wondering what could have been. My grandmother died last fall, 90 years old. She went peacefully. At her funeral, my aunt sat in the back. She didn't speak to anyone. She left before the reception. Richard came up to me afterward. He'd remarried. A kind woman who taught middle school. He looked lighter somehow, less burdened. Your grandmother was something else, he said. Yeah, she was. She told me once that the hardest thing about getting old was watching your children make mistakes and not being able to stop them. She said all you could do was try to clean up the mess afterward. The trust was her cleanup. The trust was her trying to give Jessica what Diane took. But you, he looked at me, you were her way of making sure it actually happened. She knew you wouldn't let Diane manipulate the situation. She knew you'd see it through. I owed her that much. You owed her nothing, but you did it anyway. That says something. I think about that conversation sometimes, about debt and obligation and choice. My grandmother didn't have to change her will. She could have let it go, let my aunt have the money, let the whole thing stay buried. But she chose truth over peace. She chose justice over comfort. And she trusted me to finish what she started. I'm not sure I would have done the same thing if she hadn't gone first. I might have just kept building my wall, protecting my space, staying quiet. But she showed me that sometimes silence isn't strategy. Sometimes it's just cowardice dressed up in good timing. So I finished it. I managed the trust. I made sure Jessica got her money and her future and her chance to paint again. I did what my grandmother asked me to do, and my aunt, she lives in a rental apartment in Skokie now, divorced, estranged from her daughter, cut off from most of the family. I heard she works part-time doing bookkeeping for a dental office. I don't feel good about that, but I don't feel bad either. She made choices. She stole from her daughter. She spent 20 years making everyone around her feel small. And when it caught up to her, when the proof came out, she lost everything she thought made her important. That's not my fault. That's hers. My mother asked me last month if I thought we'd gone too far, if maybe grandmother should have left Diane something more substantial. If maybe the humiliation was punishment enough. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I said, Jessica lost 6 years. She lost Northwestern. She lost her art. She lost her relationship with both her parents. She lost the future she earned. What did Aunt Diane lose? Money she never had in the first place and respect she never deserved. That's not too far, that's just fair. My mother nodded. She didn't argue. I think maybe she was starting to see it too. The difference between being kind and being just. Between keeping peace and keeping score. We don't talk about my aunt at family gatherings anymore. She's just not there. And after a while, you stop noticing the absence. I still have that leather binder in my safe, all my documentation. I don't need it anymore, but I keep it anyway. A reminder that I built something real, that I was strategic when I needed to be, that I played the long game and won. Jessica texted me yesterday, just a photo, one of her paintings. A woman standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection shows someone different. Stronger, more sure. She wrote, "I'm back." I wrote back, "You never left, you just needed the right light." She sent a heart emoji. That was it. That's enough. So did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.